We're at the season's midpoint, which makes it the perfect time to update our college football playoff projection. How many SEC teams will make it into our 12-team bracket? We'll get into that today on this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. We're also going to discuss a big coaching change outside of the SEC with Penn State firing James Franklin. Would James Franklin be a fit for any SEC jobs that are open or may come open later this season? We will discuss that as well, along with making our Week 8 picks. John, before the season, you and I drafted a 12-team playoff field, and the way we did it, we went back and forth. We each drafted 6 teams. We had to live with the other person's picks, whether we liked them or not, and we wound up with a 12-team field. I haven't gone back and looked at that bracket in some, but I don't think it's doing particularly well at this point. Teams like Clemson fell on hard times, Penn State, others that we drafted are outside of the mix. So we figured at being at the season's midpoint here, most teams have played 6 games, be a good time to draft and reset our bracket. But before we get into it, John, as you look across the land, the Big Ten plus Miami might account for the 3 best teams in college football. It was interesting. I was on the road covering a game this weekend, hanging out with a couple friends, and the general consensus among my friends who root for an SEC team thought that the SEC is just not that good. They don't have the best teams in college football. We've got a bunch of playoff contenders, but not necessarily national championship contenders. We talked about that somewhat last week. You still thinking along those lines as far as the SEC's prospects in the postseason?
Very much so, because I watched an unbeaten Ole Miss team, which I ranked very highly in my Big Ten SEC top 25, struggle against Washington State, which was a 32.5-point underdog. And you pointed out, lost by about 50 to North Texas State or somebody off the beaten path.
No state, just North Texas, I think they call themselves.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I just think, yeah, whatever.
Apologies to the folks at North Texas.
Right? Yeah, I do. Mean Green. I actually covered a North Texas game once.
Highlight of your career, wasn't it?
It ranks right up there with those Super Bowls I covered, sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a weird year. To me, it's a lot like last year in that you have these teams that are so bunched together. You got about 10 teams in the playoff discussion, but do you trust any of them to win a national championship? None of them look like a national championship team. And
right. And that doesn't mean the conference stinks.
No, I think it's as strong as ever. It's just, if you took, okay, Kentucky's the worst team in the SEC. That's pretty much a given. There's no debating that.
No debate.
But it played a competitive game against Ole Miss, which is unbeaten. But if you go to I don't know, how many teams are in this league?
If we go to as of today,
who's the second worst team in the SEC? Is it Arkansas?
South Carolina's been
South Carolina, but they can be competitive in games.
Right. Yeah, they were competitive at LSU.
Yes,
and I think that's sort of the point. Nick Saban, and I wrote a column about this over the weekend. Nick Saban was going on at length in one of his ESPN appearances entering the weekend in comparing the SEC to the Big Ten, and he was talking about how the SEC has so much more depth, and there's so many pretty good teams in the SEC. And I agree with Saban's assessment, but I also thought he was sort of missing the point, or maybe he was just shilling for the SEC in that, like, the way to win a national championship is not to have a league full of a bunch of pretty good teams. Pretty good teams either come up just short of the playoffs or make the playoffs and fade and fizzle before they make the national championship. The way to win national championships is to have a great team or 2 great teams at the top of your league. So that's what the SEC is missing. Saban's absolutely right. There are a bunch of pretty good teams in this conference. There are fewer bad teams in the SEC than any other Power 4 league. And yet each of the other Power 4 leagues have a really, really good team and maybe a great team. If Texas Tech fits the bill, then the other Power 4 leagues have at least one great team. Big Ten's got it. I think the ACC's got it in Miami. And Texas Tech, they just crushed Kansas, a team Missouri beat but had their hands full with. Texas Tech crushed them with their backup quarterback playing in the second half. Texas Tech fits the bill, then every other conference, I think, has a better national championship contender than the SEC. Now, counter argument is if you have so many teams in the playoff, like I think the SEC will have, can one of them break through?
Well, and also, Blake, you have to wonder if those teams that we're putting up on somewhat of a pedestal were in the SEC playing these SEC schedules, would they just become another one of these good teams?
Good point. Fair point. Yeah.
And keep in mind the name of our podcast too.
Unfiltered, though. It's not shilling for the SEC.
Oh, that's
yes,
true.
yes.
Yeah,
well, so before we get into our playoff draft, let me ask you this, because this is you raise an interesting question. What about some of these teams that we think look like national championship contenders, like in Miami, like in Ohio State, like maybe even in Indiana? What if they were in the SEC? I thought about that because, as I'm sure you did, I watched a lot of that Indiana-Oregon game. I had other duties, as we all do on game days, but I had at least one eye on that Indiana-Oregon game, and I thought, man, Indiana looks the part. Like, they were physical. They were the more physical team against Oregon. That's a tough place to play, too, on the road. They were physical, and I thought they were as athletic as Oregon, and that's saying something. Oregon always has athletes. Indiana's got athletes, and I thought to myself, if Indiana was in the SEC, could they win this conference? Would they be the SEC frontrunner if you transported them into the league, or do they just become like Ole Miss or Tennessee or Georgia or one of the other many teams in this league? Would you have Indiana as your SEC frontrunner if they were in this conference?
Well, I do a Big Ten SEC top 25 each week, and I have Indiana number one. So I guess my answer would be yes. Another thing about Indiana worth noting, and I'm no super supporter of the Illini, but it's a pretty good team. And you watched it against
top
Ohio
25,
State.
top 25 team ish.
Yeah. And Indiana beat it 53 points. That kind of got my attention as much as the Oregon game because it was that much better. I just, but go back, we think about it, I think people look at Ohio State as kind of, even if Indiana warrants number one recognition right now because of what it's done, you look at Ohio State and you think, well, that's the most complete team. Part of that is because Ohio State won the national championship last year and sailed through the college football playoff. However, who's Ohio State beaten? And you go back to Texas, which now looks like a middle of the road SEC team, and Ohio State on its home field beat Texas 14-7. So it's hard for me to think, well, Ohio State is just above everybody else. I think you bring up a good point with Indiana. Maybe that's the super team.
And there's going to be a lot of SEC fans listening to this, John, that are having a hard time digesting that the best team in college football could be residing in Bloomington, Indiana. But, I mean, you couldn't watch that game at Oregon and not come away thinking Indiana is a very good team. Whether you think they're the best team in the country or not, we'll see. We'll see what happens in the playoff. We'll see what happens, when they step outside the conference and play somebody with a pulse. That will remains to be judged. But I don't see how you could watch that game or watch that Illinois game you're talking about and not think this is a pretty dang good team. But you mentioned Ohio State, John. Let's get to our 12-team playoff draft here. So we're going to go back and forth. I've put it into the computer, beep, boop, bop, and I have the first selection. But that's all right. We're not going head-to-head. This is a collaborative process as we form a 12-team field, and I'm going to take the low-hanging fruit to get us started. No drama here. I'm taking Ohio State. I think you make a fair point. Does their resume warrant being the number one team in the land? Could have a good debate about that. I've seen Ohio State in person couple times now, though. They look pretty darn resolute to me. Pretty complete, I think was the word you used. I think that's accurate. They don't have an obvious weakness. Julian Sayin, the redshirt freshman quarterback. If we were to revisit that week 1 game against Texas, I think part of the reason Ohio State only won by a touchdown was they didn't ask much of their redshirt freshman quarterback, Julian Sayin, in his first career start. He's gotten better as the season's gone along. Ohio State's complete. I don't know if they're really the best team in the nation. I think they might be, but I think they're the easy number 1 choice.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things I really like about Ohio State in terms of his defense is that defense plays with an attitude of, we just don't want you to score.
Mm-hmm.
I bet it was furious that he gave up 16 points to Illinois. And there's a real pride factor you kind of sense with that Ohio State defense. And you've seen it through the years in the SEC with Alabama, some Alabama defenses, Georgia's defenses.
Mm-hmm.
We don't care what the offense does, whether it scores 3 or 53. We don't want people crossing our goal line. I think it plays with that kind of edge. And that's that cornerback, though, is just, he gets more pass interference calls than anybody I've ever seen, but it's kind of like, well, that's okay. He's being aggressive. So, and Ohio State can certainly overcome that. So, yeah, that's a logical pick. I'll go with my first pick. I don't know. I think this team can win a championship, but in terms of making the playoff, Miami's already done the hard work until at least he gets to the ACC championship game, and it really dismantled South Florida, which was playing well when it went into that game. I know that I don't trust Carson Beck, quarterback, throws a nice ball, but I would be worried about him going head to head against that Ohio State defense. If we ended up with our top 2 picks playing each other, I wouldn't like Miami's chances. But in terms of making the playoff, path to the playoffs, I got to pick Miami at this spot.
Yeah, I think that's a really safe pick. You put it well there. They've already done the hard work. Their first 4 weeks of the season included games against Notre Dame, South Florida, which is one of the best group of 5 teams in the country, and Florida in the Swamp. Then they go on the road at Florida State. They won all of them. The Notre Dame game was close. Otherwise, there was not much drama. Florida State rallied late, but Miami was in control of that game. And now they have Louisville this week, but I think they're going to roll into the ACC championship undefeated. And then you're playing with house money. If they're 12-0 in the ACC championship, I think that game then just becomes about seeding. I think they're in either way. I think they would be in at 12-1. So feels like a safe pick there. And I'm going to now take what I also feel like is a safe pick. I think Indiana has done the hard work. Well, I don't know how hard it was. It looked pretty easy against Illinois, but the hard work was going out and proving yourself at Oregon, putting to bed the questions of, is this just a cute little Cinderella story like they were last year, or are they legit? I think they proved that they're legit. I think they're better than they were last season. Their quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, is playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Their defense is solid. You look at what they have left. They're 6-0, so they're playing with some cushion here. They have no ranked opponents left on the schedule. I think they're going to roll into the Big Ten championship undefeated, and then at that point, that game becomes about seeding only.
Yeah, and their home crowd has become a plus too. I mean, those fans, they've forgotten all about basketball right now. They want to win in football, and they see all the publicity and attention that generates. When you're playing this way in college football in the fall, you're all over the headlines. And I think that's when fan bases first experience that, it really gets them revved up. It makes them even more invested in how their team plays. I look at their schedule and their road games. They just aren't daunting at all. I mean, at Maryland, at Penn State, at Purdue.
Yeah, and they could drop one of those, and I think they'd be fine. That road win at Oregon is that's given them a lot of cushion. It really does. So they're, as far as being a playoff bet, I think they're pretty safe. Who do you got as your next pick, John?
Um, my next pick is Texas Tech. Cody Campbell running that show out there and pouring the oil money into it. I just see him with a big oil can out there, just bottomless. It just keeps coming, just keeps coming, and that converts into cash. It goes in as oil. It comes out as cash, and he hands it to the player and say, "Have a good game. You'll be well rewarded. Have a better game. There's more where this came from." It's an endless supply of oil and money. Oil and Money, is that a book title, TV
If not, it
series?
should be.
Yeah, Oil and Money. Yeah. So yeah, I like Texas Tech. I think it's a complete team. And even when its number one quarterback goes down, it brings in a backup who can play. That's a big factor in this. You kind of get images of these teams through the years, and there have been Texas Tech teams, particularly under Mike Leach, that could really move the football. They were fun to watch. They were explosive. You can see them making all these highlight plays that we watch on ESPN on Saturday. But they've also got some linemen, offensive and defensive linemen, and it's showing up. This is a tough team. This is going to be a hard team for anybody to beat. So, yeah, I picked Texas Tech's my second choice.
No argument here, John. I think we tend to have this look of the Big 12 of like, oh, great parity. Anybody can beat anybody. I think for most of the Big 12, that's true. Texas Tech has separated itself from the pack, and I'm really struck by this blowout win against Kansas. Not that Kansas is a great team, but Missouri had Kansas on its home field earlier this season and won, but Missouri had more problems with Kansas than what Texas Tech did. So they got undefeated BYU later this season, but I think Texas Tech is going to keep rolling. No argument with that pick. We still haven't had a SEC team picked yet, John, which goes back to our earlier discussion of a lot of pretty good teams in the league this year, but no sure thing. And I'm still not taking an SEC team because I feel safer with Oregon as my next pick. Now, there's not a ton on the Oregon resume right now because their best win, I mean, the perspective of that has changed rapidly. They went on the road and beat Penn State in overtime, which looked like a great win at the time, but then Penn State proceeded to lose to UCLA and Northwestern. So Oregon's resume is a little thin, and I think they would be a little vulnerable if they lost a second game. You know, if they go 10-2 with losses to Indiana, and then if they were to lose to say USC later in the season, I mean, what is Oregon going to be pointing to get itself in at 10-2? But I don't think that's going to be an issue. I like their chances to run the table a little bit more than I guess I feel so solidly about any one SEC team. So I'll take Oregon as my next team.
Yeah, that makes sense. I look at that schedule and I think at Iowa can't score enough points to beat Oregon. I don't think, no matter where they're playing. The last two games, though, USC and at Washington, those to me are potential trouble spots.
I agree.
Because Damon Williams is a terrific quarterback at Washington. Southern Cal has got all kinds of talent, skill positions. And I think Southern Cal can, if it's got a big game, I think it's capable of having a really good game. I think it would be extremely motivated playing against Oregon. And like I said, it's got some playmakers. So those games to me are challenging. And if Oregon wins both of them and those teams finish with decent records, and you go back to Penn State not being a great win, it can kind of counter that with wins over Southern Cal and Washington if those teams continue to win.
No doubt. Yeah. I don't feel great about this pick, but I feel good about it. And that probably leaves you in position to where you're going to have to pick the first SEC team, I'm guessing, unless you're going to reach into the group of five.
No, I think I picked Georgia Tech as one of my playoff picks in preseason, but the way this thing fell, a lot of it has to do with the order, and
Yeah.
I
You're
wouldn't take
tempted to
it
go
up.
with Georgia
Wouldn't
Tech.
Yeah, wouldn't take it over Miami. But again, we're not picking who we think is the best team in the SEC right now, the best team in any other conference. We're talking about playoff paths,
Right.
and that's why I have to go with Ole Miss.
Undefeated, so they've got a good path to make it there.
It's hard for me to think that a SEC team at 10-2 won't make the playoff, and I just see an avenue to 10-2 for Ole Miss. It's still got to play at Georgia this week. It's got to play Florida, but that's in Oklahoma and Norman and Georgia and Athens back to back. I mean, yeah, I just see this as a playoff team.
I'm becoming a little bit concerned about Ole Miss because they wind up in so many close games. You think about that Kentucky game. That was too close for comfort. They won, but that was close. Arkansas, they're in a dogfight against Arkansas. LSU, good win, but that's a close game. Now Washington State comes to town, and they're messing around with Washington State in the fourth quarter game. Game
You're
left in the
right.
month. And so I don't disagree with the logic. At 6-0, they got the inside track. They could lose 2 games and still get there. I just wonder if their propensity for being the cardiac kids week in and week out is going to catch up with them. But they're probably as safe as anybody else in the SEC, I guess.
Yeah, I just look at it as the most logical pick. But another game I would wonder about is Mississippi State in Starkville to end the year.
Mm-hmm.
A
If they have 2
fierce.
losses and Mississippi State can knock them out of the
Oh,
playoff.
oh my gosh.
All right, so we got our first SEC team in the field, not necessarily who we're picking to win the conference, but just who you feel safe about to get into the playoff or safest. I'm going to continue with the SEC theme here and take Alabama. When we discussed on the pod last week, who do we think out of the conference is the SEC's best national championship threat? I think it's Alabama. They've won now 3 ranked games in a row. I don't know how in the world they managed to look as bad as they did in week 1 against Florida State. Years from now, the AI bots that run the world are still going to be unable to explain how Alabama lost the 2025 season opener against Florida State. But they've rattled off wins against Georgia, Vanderbilt, Missouri. They can still lose once more. Now, there's a lot of ranked opponents. There's a few ranked opponents left, but their hardest games remaining are all at home. They have Tennessee at home this week. In November, they have LSU at home, Oklahoma at home. For whatever other hiccups Kalen DeBoer has had at times in his first season and a half in Tuscaloosa, he hasn't had hiccups at Tuscaloosa. So the fact that their 3 toughest games are all at home, I think, is a big advantage. Of course, you still have the Iron Bowl at the end of the season, but I feel as good about Alabama as I do anybody else. Don't love that schedule, but I do like that the toughest games are at home. So I'm taking Alabama.
Yeah, that makes sense. A really tough schedule. And if it wins as a favorite in the rest of its games, it's going to be seated pretty high in the playoffs because of the work it's done, strength of schedule. It's been good in the clutch, and it has a really hot quarterback in Ty Simpson, who disproves the theory of somebody just kind of hanging around as a backup. That, well, you elevate him to if he's the best you got and he never started before, what's the point? Well, he's showing you what the point is. He has been remarkably accurate. He threw a pass between 2 defenders that he completed against Missouri. I mean, you couldn't have put the ball in there better. Patrick Mahomes couldn't have thrown a better ball. So, yeah, that's a solid pick. Now I go with Texas A&M. And I would feel better about this if I just saw the team and didn't know it was Texas A&M.
They need different jerseys. They need to be wearing an Alabama jersey or something, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Call it Aggie University or just change up something because, yeah, my history with Texas A&M, repeated over rankings, over ratings, think this is the year, and this is the year never comes. But when I watch this team, I see a pretty well-rounded team. I see a team that can run the ball. It has depth at running back, can throw the ball. Marcel Reed's is an underrated quarterback. He's improved. And let's face it, that A&M win at South Bend, coming from behind against Notre Dame in the last couple of minutes, that's one of the best wins anybody has.
I agree.
So, and that kind of goes against the image of Texas A&M football. You get to that big game like it did in the opener last year against Notre Dame on its home field and blew it, played horribly. Get to that big game and you underperform, but it didn't underperform. Not only that, it came through in the clutch. So this might be a different A&M. So I think that's a logical pick at this juncture.
And they got the record and the schedule advantage too, much like Ole Miss. They're sitting there at 6-0, so they're playing with a little more cushion than these one-loss SEC teams. My only concern with Texas A&M, other than those jerseys, because like you said, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable if I didn't have the history in mind. But it's that their toughest games, unlike Alabama, A&M's toughest games remaining are on the road. They're on the road against LSU in a couple weeks. They're on the road at Missouri, and they finish on the road at Texas. They better only have one loss, I think, when they're going into Austin. Because if they're sitting on 2 losses by then and they need to win on the road at Texas to get in the playoff, I don't know how I like those chances. So I think they need to split on the road at least with LSU and Missouri and hold serve against their unranked opponents. So they're playing with some cushion going into that regular season finale, I think.
Yeah, does that game at Fayetteville bother you at all? That's where A&M's headed next, because Arkansas,
it bothers me a
bad
little.
record, fired coach, but it played Ole Miss close and played Tennessee close.
I tell you what, when we get to our picks portion of the pod and I see Texas A&M sitting there at a 7.5 road favorite, I'm not going near the Aggies with that spread. So that tells you that I am a little bit concerned about that one. Next pick, John, I'm taking Notre Dame. And if you would have the first two, Notre Dame is going about this playoff thing really in the exact opposite way of teams like Indiana and Miami, where we say like the hay's in the barn at this point. Now just don't blow it. Notre Dame starts in opposite fashion. They have their 2 toughest games right out of the chute. They lose at Miami. They lose on their home field to Texas A&M. But those 2 losses were by a combined 4 points. That didn't kill them. And so all they had to do, simple enough, right, is win 10 in a row. Well, it might not seem that simple, but then when you look at the schedule, it's like, who else is going to trip them up? They've already rattled off 4 in a row here. The big one is this weekend at home against USC. They lose to USC, they're out. If they win to USC, drop the confetti, I think Notre Dame's in the playoff, because after that, they have Boston College, Navy, Pittsburgh, Syracuse, and Stanford. We see any of those teams beating Notre Dame? I don't think so. So to me, this is really a playoff qualifier this weekend for Notre Dame. And I know that will rankle some people of, well, you lost to Miami, lost to Texas A&M. Why you don't play in a conference? Why should you be in? We can have all those conversations at another time. Do I really think the committee is going to spit out and reject a Notre Dame team that's won 10 in a row? No, I do not. I think Notre Dame's going to run the table. I think they're going to beat USC this week, get to 10-2. I think they're going to be in the playoff.
I agree. And we go back to last season when Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois of all teams. I mean, how do you overcome that blemish on your record?
Yeah, and then there they are as a 7 seed in the playoff, right?
Yeah. So go figure and end up playing for the national title. So I give Marcus Freeman credit. He doesn't. His teams don't. They can handle defeat and put it behind them and play well. Boy, they really look. They look like world beaters against Arkansas. I know Arkansas isn't great, but everybody else has played. Arkansas has played everybody else close, pretty much. Mm-hmm. But Notre Dame, 42 points by halftime, and absolutely moved the ball at will. So, yeah, that's a solid pick. Next, I'll go with Tennessee. Talk about close calls. Everything's a close call with Tennessee. Josh Heupel, its coach, getting a lot of criticism for how he plays in the fourth quarter, his play calling, clock management some, but just getting a little too conservative in the minds of fans who are like to attack life with great aggressiveness, take chances, and roll through the world. But Tennessee still, that schedule, it'll look favorable in preseason. It looks favorable at midseason, and I think it will be a favorable factor when you close out because Tennessee loses to Alabama at Tuscaloosa. It's a 9.5 point dog. Loses that game. Still got only 2 losses. If he can beat Oklahoma and Knoxville and snap that Florida jinx in Gainesville, and who knows what state will Florida football team will Florida be in penultimate Saturday of the season? I mean, think about it. It's already lost 4 games, and I just see that team really dropping off at some point.
I have some concerns with this pick, and they're not. They're wrapped up in the fact that Tennessee was pushed to the limit by Mississippi State a couple weeks ago, and then they had their hands full with Arkansas in Neyland Stadium. But you're right about the schedule. Like of any of the SEC's playoff contenders, maybe only Ole Miss has a more favorable schedule remaining, and maybe not even that. But Tennessee could lose to Alabama this weekend if they beat, as you said, they beat Oklahoma at home, win at the Swamp, beat Vanderbilt. I mean, yeah, there's some landmines out there, but every team's got some landmines remaining. I think this is a manageable schedule. I got some concerns about that Tennessee defense. I mean, allow 34 points to Mississippi State, allow 31 points to Arkansas, couldn't stop Georgia at all in the second half and overtime. I wonder if that defense costs them one, whether that's in the Swamp, whether that's against Vanderbilt. I don't know. Now, if they beat Alabama this weekend in Tuscaloosa, then I think they're fine. They're going to skate into the playoff. If they lose to Alabama, they need to win 5 in a row to get in. Can they do it? Maybe. Don't feel great about it, but hey, at this stage, who do you feel great about? We would already pick them. I don't feel great about this one, John, but I'm leaving the group of 5 pick to you as I pick now a 5th SEC qualifier. Fits our theme of I think the conference is going to produce a lot of playoff qualifiers. I don't know if they're going to produce a team that makes the national championship, but for my 5th playoff qualifier from the SEC, I'm taking Georgia. Georgia just finds a way. Didn't look great against Auburn, spotted Auburn a 10-point lead, but then dominated in the second half, much like they looked terrible in the first half at Neyland Stadium. Came out of halftime, made adjustments, and won. So they got the 1 loss to Alabama, but that's not going to kill them. 3 ranked opponents left: Ole Miss, Texas, Georgia Tech. They'd be vulnerable at 9-3. Can they get to 10-2? It's not a slam dunk, but Kirby Smart's still got a winning culture there. I don't think it's a great team. I think it's one of those pretty good teams, but there are other teams in this conference, such as Auburn, that keep finding ways to lose. Georgia, when it doesn't have its best fastball, usually finds ways to win. And so as far as who's left in the SEC to choose from, or what else is in the land available, I'll go with Georgia for my final pick.
Well, that certainly makes sense. There's a reason I think Kirby Smart, other than the national championships, he's won 2 back-to-back. There's a reason Kirby Smart's perceived as the best coach in the country in college football now. His teams, you just can't put his team away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Georgia can look so vulnerable at times, particularly at the outset of a game. And you think, well, this is the day that Georgia gets exposed. All of its weaknesses. It can't do this. It can't do that. And then the next thing you know, you didn't knock it out, and it's hanging around. And then here it comes. Kirby makes some adjustments. The team gets rolling. There's something to be said about that because in a big game, and there's going to be some adversity in a tough game, there's going to be adversity at some point. This team feasts on adversity.
It does.
It really does. And so I just think I agree with you. I think Georgia will do enough. it'll do enough to get in the playoff. And I know it has to play Texas, and it's got Ole Miss this week. They're at home. The Georgia Tech game to me is maybe the scariest game on Georgia's schedule, because Georgia Tech, that game is everything for Georgia Tech. And if it comes down to that, where Georgia has to win that game to get in the playoff, that's added pressure.
And they
That could
almost
be
blew it last year.
they almost blew it last year. And Georgia Tech, as I said, that game is so important. That's a program changer for Georgia Tech. And there's also a possibility Georgia Tech could be playing for a playoff berth in that game.
Yeah, if we were going to make either the Big 12 or the ACC a two-bid league, I think we would probably both go with the ACC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe and reach for Georgia Tech. We didn't do it, and now it's down to the final pick. You have to pick a group of 5 team, but I'd be more tempted to make the ACC a two-bid league than I would the Big 12. You?
Yeah, I agree. I don't know about BYU. It's unbeaten. I don't have a good read on them, I guess, right now. I haven't watched them play an entire game.
Well, for your final pick, John, you're pigeonholed in here. You got to pick a group of 5 team to round out our bracket. Who's it going to be?
Well, when I start looking across college football's landscape to come up with this team from a group, it makes me think, no, they don't deserve having one team in. They got to prove themselves as an enlarged team. They don't deserve a berth, because I see teams in these other conferences, Power 4 conferences, that I think are better than this team. But I guess I favor the team I've seen the most. I've seen South Florida 3 or 4 times this year. I like what I've seen, so has to win at Memphis, but I think I would go with South Florida. But that's, and there's some other SEC teams I don't think it could beat.
Sure, although it did beat Florida in the swamp.
It beat Florida, but we're not talking about Florida as a playoff contender.
That's true. No, it is a bit of a crapshoot, and the group of 5 other contenders would be UNLV, Memphis. You mentioned big game against South Florida in a couple weeks, and then Tulane probably still in the mix from that conference as well. So there's a handful, but I think South Florida probably the safest pick. Their only loss is to Miami. They're not going to be penalized by that. It's just they have to win their league, and I think whoever wins the American will be the qualifier. The exception could be if UNLV runs the table and the American gets messy. But yeah, I think I feel as good about that group of 5 team as any other. So there's our final 12-team bracket here at the midseason. We put our heads together, and we have Ohio State, Miami, Indiana, Texas Tech, Oregon, Ole Miss, Alabama, Texas A&M, Notre Dame, Tennessee, Georgia, South Florida. Left on the cutting room floor from the SEC would be Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Vanderbilt, LSU, and others. How different.
LSU, my number 1 pick in preseason. Oops.
Well, I wasn't going to go there, John, but
I'm glad you mentioned UNLV, though, since we sort of are co-sponsors of the Dan Mullen.
He really ought to sponsor our podcast for as much
Yeah,
time
he
as
really
we
should.
spend talking about Dan Mullen on here.
And we come cheap too. Keep that in
Yes,
mind.
yeah.
But Dan Mullen is he's done a nice job there. Penn State, when you start looking around.
Arkansas,
okay?
when you
Arkansas, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of Penn State, John, that's a good segue because James Franklin is out at Penn State after 12 seasons there. Penn State made the move on Sunday with James Franklin riding a 3-game losing streak. So James Franklin is available. He can be patient if he wants to be before he gets back into this coaching thing, because he's owed a buyout from Penn State in excess of $49 million. Thank you, Jimmy Sexton. So he's living in buyout bliss right now. But if James Franklin wants to get back into the coaching biz, I'm wondering what you think about him for some jobs that are either open right now or could become open in a few weeks. So let's do a round of love it, like it, or no thanks? I'm going to ask you if you like the idea from the school's perspective of hiring James Franklin. Let's start with a few SEC jobs, John, that are either open now or could be open in the coming weeks. Arkansas, love it, like it, no thanks.
Love it.
Not open now, but could be open soon. Florida.
Love it.
Not open now, but could be open soon. Auburn.
Love it.
Oh my, 3 love it. How about let's step inside the Big Ten? Not open now, but could be open. Wisconsin.
Love it.
One more from the Big Ten that is open. UCLA.
Pause for dramatic effect, and then love it.
A clean sweep for James Franklin. That's 5 love it's, John. Yeah, clearly you think highly of James Franklin as a program builder, a consistent winner, not a big game coach, but why are you going with 5 love it's for James Franklin here?
My goodness, I live in Tennessee, and I saw what he did at Vanderbilt of all places. 3 straight bowl games. You can do that. I mean, that's like you couldn't have a better a name on your resume as a program builder than winning as he did at Vanderbilt. What he did was, to me, amazing. And he's done well at Penn State. No, he hasn't won the biggest games, and he hadn't won a national title, but he got his team in the playoff. So, yeah, if you're looking for somebody to turn your program around, and all of those teams you mentioned are, I don't know if these teams could do much better than that. Now, I can see reasons why James Franklin wouldn't be interested in some of those jobs, but I look at this. I look at the coaches they've hired: Florida, Billy Napier; Arkansas, Sam Pittman; Auburn, Hugh Freeze with too much baggage; Wisconsin, Lou Fickell. Don't hire a coach with the F in his last name, because the alliteration is irresistible to fans when they want him gone. Fire Fickell just comes easily.
Rolls off the tongue, especially when you're losing by 37 points to Iowa.
Yeah.
It really rolls off the tongue then. Yeah. Okay, so here's my pushback with James Franklin, John. I think if he would have been fired after the Oregon game, I would have heard all these arguments, right? The problem is, now that he's lost in back-to-back weeks to UCLA and Northwestern, that sort of changes the narrative a little bit on James Franklin, because the narrative was always he's going to beat all the teams he's supposed to beat, and he's going to lose all the big games he plays. But now he's lost to a previously winless UCLA team, which did win a second in a row against Michigan State, but lost UCLA and then loses to Northwestern. And that sort of changes the narrative, at least in the short term, of this guy wins all the games he's supposed to win. And I'm wondering, if you're UCLA, how you announce James Franklin as your coach after he just couldn't beat the interim. And the other thing I wonder about is Arkansas. Can you see James Franklin calling the Hogs? I mean, the cultural fit, I think, between James Franklin and Arkansas, it's kind of a 180, isn't it? I mean, I agree with you. He's a good program builder, a consistent winner. I'm just wondering how you trot out at the introductory press conference, which shouldn't matter. But you know just as well as I do, those ADs stress about how's this going to play? You know, how's this going to play with the fans? How's this going to look at the introductory press conference? How do you walk out there after James Franklin loses to UCLA and Northwestern and plop a hog hat on his head and have him call the Hogs?
I know. I just envisioned him with a hog hat on it. It really doesn't fit. It looks like a clown show, but it fits Sam Pittman, and we saw how that era ended.
True.
So, yeah, I don't care how the hog hat fit. If Arkansas would decline on him because he's not a good fit, well, just keep losing. Keep calling the Hogs and keep losing. But James Franklin, I don't think, would go to Arkansas. I think he can do better than that. UCLA, UCLA, I don't see any way he would want that job.
Not when he's got a $49 million buyout check coming in.
Yeah.
I don't think that's one lump sum, but it's pretty nice to have a paycheck from a former employer coming in with some zeros on it every so often.
if UCLA calls him, he's got 3 letters, NIL. He won't ask how much can you pay me. He'll ask me how much can you pay my players. Chip Kelly left there for an offensive coordinator's job at Ohio State for a reason. And it wasn't because UCLA had all the NIL money in the world to throw around. It doesn't. It just doesn't care enough. I wouldn't be surprised if UCLA just promoted its interim coach to head coach.
He's won 2 in a row. Maybe Deshaun Foster was the problem. Maybe it wasn't Nico Iamaleava. Maybe it was all Deshaun Foster all along. But you mentioned a couple.
I think it's UCLA is the problem.
Well,
yeah.
But hey, they're 2-0 with the interim.
Okay.
But no, I think that's fair. I think UCLA is a big part of the problem. But I want to get back to Franklin because you mentioned a couple that I do think I don't see him with the hog head on, and I do think culture isn't everything, but at the first sign of trouble, it helps if you're a cultural fit there. I think if Hugh Freeze wasn't a fit at Auburn, would he even still be the coach at Auburn today? It extends your runway a little bit when you're a fit, and when you're a bit of a cultural 180, like say Brian Kelly is at LSU, does it shorten your runway? But a couple mentioned with Franklin. I mean, Wisconsin, if they pass the hat and get enough money to fire Luke Fickell, which they should do. I mean, when you're losing 37 points by 37 points to Iowa, you pass the hat and pass it again until it has enough money to fire your coach. I mean, Wisconsin needs someone to bring them back to the respectability they had under Barry Alvarez and Brett Bielema and Paul Chryst. I mean, James Franklin, I think, would be a slam dunk to bring Wisconsin back to Wisconsinability. I don't think you're going to win a national championship with James Franklin at Wisconsin, but I do think he gets you back into some playoff contention. What about Florida, though, John? Because I think Florida fans, we've talked before about they don't want to win. They want to win, but they also want to be entertained. They want some offensive savvy. They want Steve Spurrier 2.0. James Franklin, program builder, wins about 70% of his games. He's not Steve Spurrier 2.0. I'm wondering how that would go over at Florida, James Franklin.
Well, when you look at all the misses Florida's had on hiring coaches, the coaches it's fired, its overall success rate when you take out the Steve Spurrier era and the Urban Meyer era, I don't know how much they would worry about that. I think he could do a great job at Florida. However, I would caution James Franklin about that job. I mean, just as I would the Wisconsin job. I mean, he's been in the Big Ten. He's failed to keep up with the heavyweights. And even if he rebuilds Wisconsin football, at some point, it's going to be, well, why can't you beat Ohio State?
Yeah, but and then his you just answer, collect another $49 million buyout check.
Yeah.
Life is good.
Yeah. He's going to do just fine no matter how this unfolds. But I do think he could really build a formidable team at Florida. Would it be good enough to win the SEC now? I don't know about that. But I think
what I'd do if I was James Franklin, John? I might sit out a year or two and hope that my successor at Penn State does it worse than what James Franklin did. Because right now, the image fans and ADs are going to have in their mind of James Franklin is losing at UCLA and Northwestern. Give it a year or two, live on buyout beach for a while, and then come back in a couple seasons and maybe whoever Penn State hires does worse than James Franklin. And you say, how do you like me now? The old Dan Mullen effect, right? He waits a few years. Billy Napier is a massive bust. And Dan Mullen gets to say, how do you like me now? Now, Dan Mullen didn't land on his feet in the Power Four, but he's got UNLV undefeated. And I think James Franklin has proven himself very, very consistently. I don't know that he would have to go down to the UNLV levels. I think he could, take a couple years off here, hope Penn State takes a step back and say, guess I wasn't so bad after all, right? Who wants me?
When you were talking about that and sitting out, a program that came to mind to me is Florida State. I know it's got Mike Norvell, and it's just been
It
up
might
and
wish it didn't have Mike Norvell.
well, I'm starting to wonder because I think Florida State can spend money and it wants to win and it wants to win big. I could see him doing really well at Florida State. And in that conference, I think there's a better path to the playoffs at Florida State than there is at Florida if you're doing comparative shopping. And I don't think Florida State has any preconceived notion about well, we need to get a Florida State guy. We've got this coaching prototype in mind that we need to get. I mean, yeah, they love Bobby Bowden, but it's not going to go after somebody who's a great offensive play caller, program builder, and winner, and he's folksy and funny too. No, it just wants to win, and it wants to beat Miami, and it wants to beat Florida State. I'm not trying to fire Mike Norvell, but I just think at some point people are starting to see that Norvell era is ups and downs, ups and downs. And it got that great win to start the season. Great turnaround win after going 2-10 last year. Beats Alabama. What's happened since?
What's happened since is Florida State's in last place in the ACC. No, I think that's right, John. I don't know. Mike Norvell's buyout is huge. I think it'd be $58 million at the end of the season. So he probably gets another trip around the sun. And if it goes like this again next year, I don't mind that idea. James Franklin at Florida State, that makes some sense to me. That makes more sense than he's calling the Hogs in a month.
And
I think
that
the
hog
Chicken
hat.
Man wants James Franklin calling the Hogs.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
All right, let's get to our picks, John. We can take a victory lap right now because I went 3-2 last week. You went 4-1. My goodness, we're on a hot streak, and we're almost back to 500 for the season. We are tied at 17-18 overall in our picks against the spread. Here we go. I'm going to do my 5-pack of picks, pretty rapid fire here. I'm taking Vanderbilt at home, 2.5-point favorite against LSU. LSU's offense does not inspire any confidence. I will give the 2.5 points, take the doors against LSU, something you never would have dreamed of saying as recently as a few years ago. I'm taking Texas, a 10.5-point favorite at Kentucky. I think I'd pick just about anybody against Kentucky at this point. Texas got off the mat in the Red River Shootout. I'm rolling with Texas to have some of their problems solved. I'll give the 10.5 points, take them to cover the spread. Georgia at home. I am giving the 7.5 points and taking the favored Bulldogs against Ole Miss. I'm a little concerned about Ole Miss after how closely it played with Washington State last week. So I'm taking Georgia at home as a 7.5-point favorite. Taking Missouri on the road as a 1.5-point favorite at Auburn. Hugh Freeze said it after his team lost to Georgia. Auburn finds ways to not win games. That will be the lead item if Hugh Freeze is fired this season. This was a man who came close to winning a lot more games, but kept finding ways to lose. So I'm taking Missouri as a 1.5-point favorite. Finally, my lock of the week. This one might sound counterintuitive. It's part of the reason why I'm taking it. Duke, unranked, a 2.5-point favorite at home against Georgia Tech, the ranked team. I should take Georgia Tech, right? No, I'm not going to do it. Duke has looked good the last few games, seems to have some things figured out. I'm taking the home team and giving the 2.5 points. All favorites for me this week in my 5-pack of picks.
If I were thinking strategically, I would pick every game just as you did.
So we could stay tied.
And then come up with a lock because I don't feel good about any of my SEC picks. I can just envision an 0-4. I might miss them all. Keep that in mind when we review this next week. I just don't feel good. Well, no, we do have one in common. I would take Texas giving the points, although my betting advisor and a gambling influencer, Cody, likes Kentucky in that game, likes it a lot.
You tell Cody you went 4-1 last week, John. So,
but Cody also picked Texas Tech to win last week too and cover. So
Yeah, maybe the reason
he
you
was
went
right.
4-1 is you've been listening to Cody a little bit more recently.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so
he's
I'll take
advising you to stay away from it, but you're giving the 10.5 points and taking Texas.
yes. Is it
Yeah.
down to 10.5?
Yeah, what it was 11.5, but it's as we make these picks, it's 10.5. So you like it even more now, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
But I still don't like it a lot. I like it more, but I don't like it a lot. Uh, then I'm going against you on this one. I'm taking Ole Miss 7.5. The reason I think Georgia will win the game, but Georgia is playing so many close games. I think Ole Miss can hang in there and cover.
That's true.
Uh,
Both teams play a lot of close games, so I didn't feel great about my picks either. We're really wishy-washy this week. We had some confidence last week, and it showed in our
Oh, very
records.
much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is good in a way that we evince uncertainty because that way people won't say, well, I'm not listening to them. They want an authoritative opinion that they say, yeah, I agree. Yeah, they want somebody to convince them that they're going to make money. And we're not doing that at all. I'm basically saying, you want to throw your money away? Follow these picks.
Or give a
Uh,
coach a guaranteed contract.
yeah, here's another one. Oklahoma minus 4.5. I just can't believe Oklahoma played John Mateer against Texas. That was a huge error. If you lose that
Massive
game,
error.
we talked about this last week. If you lose without Mateer against Texas, the college football selection committee is not going to hold you accountable to that. It's going to say, well, it didn't have Mateer. It probably would have won if he could have played against Texas. Now you just look at it and say, well, he played and you lost by 17 points. I really don't like South Carolina.
You were all over that one in the preseason. You had them as being way overrated. You were vindicated. The less said, the better about some of our other prognostications. But you had that one all over. So you're giving the 4.5 points and taking Oklahoma. Okay.
yes. And then, gosh, LSU. I've got to take LSU here, though. Their offense is an absolute mess. I can't. You talk about things I was wrong about. I thought this was going to be a dynamic offense. I thought it would have one of the highest scoring teams in the country, and it can't get out of its own way.
So
Uh,
why are you picking them against Vanderbilt?
because I just look at those two programs, and I think all the resources LSU has and the resources Vanderbilt has, and you're telling me Vanderbilt's a given 2.5 points? I've got to take LSU there.
Hmm. This is how they build all those tall buildings out in Vegas.
Yes, they do.
uh,
Okay. But I also, Cody and my advisor, were on board with this for the lock of the week in that we both went to the same conference. Now, he liked Toledo, giving 23.5 to Kent State. Kent State, so many times my lock of the week, and I flipped the script last week by taking Kent State, giving points to UMass, my new favorite football program, the Massachusetts Minutemen. Here's what a
you
columnist.
almost you you almost had a slip of the tongue there, John, with the Minutemen.
Oh, okay.
Sounded like you're about ready to call them the Minute Women.
Here,
No comment. Okay.
Fraudian. I read this. I don't know this columnist, Cameron Pellegrino. I just ran across this column on the
Oh,
internet.
one of my favorites. Think the world of him.
Well, there you go. I'm glad I'm using him as a source. His lead was throughout 2025, UMass has displayed a level of incompetence that shouldn't be possible at any level.
That's a bold take. Might be
I
spot
mean,
on though.
he took a program. UMass lost to Kent State by 36 points. Kent State, which went 2 years without winning a game. So to me, I love this. Buffalo giving 16.5 against UMass. I love Buffalo in that game.
Mm. What do you think of Buffalo the city? Been there? On the way to the Niagara Falls?
Yeah, you know what I remember about Buffalo? I was covering a game there. That's when I was a columnist in Jacksonville. I was covering a well, it's a long story, but anyway, I had my own budget. I ended up, but I was driving through Buffalo and I saw this car, and it's probably old by now, but I just saw this bumper sticker and it just said 40 isn't old. And then in smaller type, I had to get up closer to the tree to the car, and then when I got up close, it says 40 isn't old if you're a tree. So that kind of stuck with me. That's my memory of Buffalo, and the fact that the wind blows a lot at Buffalo Bills games, which gives me a new appreciation for any quarterback there playing for the Bills. Got to throw through that strong wind that just blows relentlessly.
Nothing matches your appreciation for James Franklin and the success he did at Vanderbilt, John.
Love it.
Love it. Hope you loved this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered. We'll be back with you next week.